academics are never late, they just get delayed. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming. The rain outside is also disrupting in its own way. So a number of people are coming in, and a number of people that we were hoping would be here are not here with us. But we celebrate with those who have made it to this day. This is a good turnout itself, but we also have lots of people who are online, who are joining us virtually in this lecture, which is the 2025 Professor Steve Mark Degrushi, who was one of our great luminary theologians, not only for South Africa. He was a global theologian who actually died at a very tender age. And we've made it a tradition of the cluster of theological institutions since his death. In fact, it's now almost 15 years that we have been marking this day and remembering Steve Degrushi. As some of you would know, Steve Degrushi was a son to John Degrushi. Steve was married. His wife is Marion Degrushi, and they had children. Very, very committed people in the cause of theological education. Those who have done and who are still going to do theology and development in the School of Religion, Philosophy and Classics, it might be exciting for you to know that actually he was the pioneer director, program director of that program, who set it up. In our midst, we may also have, and I know we are going to have, people from the United Congregational Church of Southern Africa, which is Steve's church. So there's a delegation that always come every year to celebrate with us. So I therefore formally welcome into this lecture students from Sitara, St. Joseph Theological Institute, student from Seth Mukitimi Methodist Seminary, student from ESA, the Evangelical Theological Seminary for Southern Africa, and also students from the University of KwaZulu-Natal, but also people who are joining us from throughout South Africa and other parts of the world in this lecture. Most importantly, it is a privilege and an honor to welcome to our midst a brother and friend, Dr. Derek Basson, who has agreed all the way from the US to come and do this lecture for us. I must say we needed to persuade him only once. After that, he was ready to come. He was on the next plane to come to South Africa. And so we welcome you, sir. Good that you came to us to be here. For the past 4 years, we've had a privilege of colleagues from all over the world who have come to do these lectures, not costing us anything to bring them, but offering themselves and their resources to travel all the way to come to South Africa to do this lecture. So you are therefore welcomed. We also know that people who represent the KwaZulu-Natal Christian Council, KZN should be with us here. They will be coming from with the Indlamu group that's going to be entertaining us. I'm not sure if they have already arrived, because if they have arrived, I will give them an opportunity to come and do that. But if they have not arrived, we will therefore continue with our program, and they will join us. Now, I will take this opportunity and request the president of St. Mukitimi Methodist Seminary, Dr. Rowan Murray, to come forward to welcome you here on behalf of our chairperson of cluster, which is Father Joe Phiri. And maybe because the entertainment group is not here and nothing has been sung, and a president from St. Mukitimi Methodist Seminary has been called forward, then it becomes St. Mukitimi Seminary's opportunity to start a song and start and get us going. Okay? Can you do it? We did.
So you'll have to go close to the mic and speak louder. The people online are struggling to hear.
Thank you. You may be seated. So the program states that it is Father Joseph Phiri that will extend a welcome to you on behalf of the cluster of theological institutions. I am not Father Phiri, but I am standing in today for Father Phiri, who was unfortunately not able to be with us. And so, friends, it is always a privilege and an honor for us to be part of this very special and significant event where we take time to honor and celebrate the memory of our dearly loved Professor Steve Degrushi. We have representatives from various institutions. We have students as well as faculty. And so on behalf of the cluster, we want to extend to you a warm and a cordial welcome. If we normally have this tradition of giving you an opportunity to do a shout out. So if I can get UKZN, if you could just wave to us so we can see where you are and who you are. Let's give them a round of applause, friends. And then we have friends from UKZN. Can we just have a wave of hands so we can give them also a round of applause? UKZN, there we go, thank you. We have our colleagues from St. Joseph Theological Institute. Wherever you are, let's just see you so we can acknowledge you. There we go. We have SMMS. SMMS, there we go. All right, so there was almost a room full. And then we might have friends from KZNCC. I'm not sure if they have joined us. If there are reps from KZNCC, we extend to you also a very warm and a cordial welcome. And so we welcome you on behalf of the cluster. And I would also want to invite Professor Philippe Denis, who is the coordinator, and he's going to say a brief word about the cluster. But just as he comes up, to mention that I am one of the many products of Professor Steve Degrushi, and as a graduate of theology and development, so a lecture at times such as this holds very special place to many of us who have gone through the hands of this great giant, Professor Steve Degrushi. And so I hand you over to Professor Denis, and he's going to tell you a little bit about the cluster. Thank you, Prof.
Yeah, I won't be long. What I wanted to say, this meeting here, in present and online, is the expression of what the Pietermaritzburg Cluster of Theological Institution should be. It's student and staff from different theological institutions coming together. And it's not a small achievement, because the very fact that the cluster exists We meet here. We've got cluster staff, the cluster staff there, cluster post there, executive, other, and the council, and other, and subject committee. A number of meeting opportunities to bring forward the message that you cannot do good theological training alone, a single denomination on the side. We need to find various ways of being together. In other words, this is the expression of the ecumenical nature of theological education as we want it. And Steve, whom we commemorate today after already 15 years, was passionate about that, so it's fitting that this memorial lecture has his name. Thank you.
I didn't actually think that Philip was going to be so brief. I was still expecting more. But I'm not disappointed that you were brief. It's good. Thank you so much. Colleagues, we are now having to have Reverend Komo, who is going to be speaking on behalf of the United Congregational Church of Southern Africa, which is Steve Degrushi's church. To those who may not know much about Steve Degrushi, he was, as I've already said in the beginning, was the son of John Degrushi, who was an ordained minister of the Congregational Church. Now, one of the contributions, the many contributions, you can actually Google Steve and see his papers online already. You can do that. Just put in Steve Degrushi. You'll see his photo, you'll see his writings and all the work that he did. He was an ordained minister of the Congregational Church of Southern Africa. He was in most of their committees where he played a vital role in transforming the church. But one of the most poignant contribution that usually gets forgotten by people when they are thinking about Steve is that he was a conscientious objector. During the time of apartheid, where young men who were white were conscripted, expected to go after finishing school, they needed to go for 2 years to serve in the army, to serve the country, their country at the time, and protect the system of apartheid in a way. Steve Degrushi refused to go. And it meant that he needed to be arrested and face the wrath of the system for taking that decision. It's one of the most and the important contributions that Steve made. Then many more other things followed up. A lot of students can tell you today, it was Steve who invited them to come to the university. It was Steve who looked for bursaries and scholarships for those students. It was Steve who supervised during his days in here. He would supervise at least between 8 and 10 PhD and master's students at the same time, which was very important to do, and raised millions of rands for the university, and more specifically for students, and more specifically students of color who came from the disadvantaged background, so that they could come to university and have their fees paid for them. I remember quite well, some of us can attest that he mobilized resources to enable younger theologians. It was around 2007, if I remember quite well. Were coming from KwaZulu-Natal, the Free State, other parts of Johannesburg, and paired them with other theologians from overseas, Europe, and all that, to produce a book, an edited volume, titled From the Other Side, meaning the voices from the South on development. And as if that was not enough, a whole lot of us cut our teeth in publishing through that book, and then organized a 2-week trip to visit Europe. We were in Amsterdam, we went to England, we went to other parts of the world. Imagine how much it was to pay for people to go all over the world for 2 weeks. Young black scholars who benefited from Steve Degrushi's scholarship. And there's a story I've always told people about him, that when he died on a Saturday. He drowned in one of the rivers, in Moy River. I had left the university earlier in the week to attend some seminars that I was part of and organizing and doing early in the week. And I arrive on Friday. I get to my shelf in the office. There was a big file like this of papers, lots and lots of papers, and applications and other material. And on top, there was just a note that came from Steve. He wrote, Simanga, I know that one day you will want to apply for promotion in the university. And I know it is difficult to apply. These papers are the papers I've also used to do my own applications. I hope they will help you. I took that big file, put it in my office. It was a Friday. Put it in my office. I was going to see it on Monday. And over the weekend, at 9 o'clock during the day on Saturday, the following day, Steve died. And we get the message that he has disappeared and all that in the river he was tubing and all that. We all get surprised what has happened and all that. Of course, we only got the message on Wednesday that he had died. And there was just a very, very difficult mood in the school when he had died. But I'm giving you an example of the type of person that we're celebrating here. It's not everyone. It's not every academic, I cannot tell you that, who will, even after 10 years that they have died, people will still be working hard to keep their memory alive. Will go all their way to look for resources when there are no resources to host a lecture. They will be pursuing people to come and speak on their behalf. They'll be doing this kind of work. And Steve, this is happening through Steve because of his personality and the type of person that he was. And the whole world was mourning during we received lots and lots of messages from all over the world when he died. And his funeral was held here at the cathedral. There was over 1,000 people at the cathedral that day who went to bid Steve farewell as he moved on to the next life. And as Africans, we've refused to let his memory fade away. We've intentionally worked day in, day out to ensure that we keep his memory alive. For he was one of the finest, one of those people who combined theology and the academy so well, was not embarrassed by the fact that he was a pastor. But at the same time, when he was in the church, the churches are very good in pretending. They can pretend today that they loved him so much and all. They actually hated him, because of the way he pushed and challenged the church. Like all good theologians, he wasn't at peace with his church. If you are a theologian and your church loves you to death, there is something wrong with you. Good theologians find it difficult to live with the church, and the church finds it difficult to live with their theologians, because theologians asked the difficult questions that the church needs to try and respond to. And so he was a good theologian. He loved the church. But the church didn't always love him. They only loved him when we had so much to say, to celebrate, and make noise about him. But when things, there were meetings that he had to storm out of meetings with anger and then turn his back from, but of course then come back. Because that's what the church is all about. The church is our mother. But this mother, excuse the language, is sometimes not faithful. So the question is, how do you live with your mother who is sometimes not faithful? It is the tension that we need to live with. I'll ask here Reverend Gomo to come forward to speak on behalf of the Congregational Church. I don't know if there are Congregationalists here who can sing as he comes forward. You heard what the Methodists do, which is not surprising anyway. There was nothing surprising with that, and I will not even be surprised if there is nothing that comes from the UCCSA after that rendition. Surprise me.
I greet you all, my brothers and sisters, in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, and a warm welcome to this moment that we reflect on the life of Steve Degrushi. And thanks very much to Prof. Kumalo. You have made it easier. You know, on our way with the students as I was driving, I was telling them about your theology and your argument that you once raised, that the UCCSA will sometimes face a challenge. Even when Jesus is knocking, they will be waiting for a meeting to decide whether to open or not. And I said, oh, so they were looking at me and saying, so Kumbala said, yeah, he's a good pastor, but those are some of the things. You say the Congregational Church is a good church. The problem is they take decisions in meetings. So even when Jesus is there, they will say, no, we need to meet first and agree whether to open or not. And that is one thing. It's a mark, something that we always, as I'm just greeting you all, my brothers, we are reflecting on the life of Steve Degrushi because of the contributions and the impact that he had, that he made in the lives of many people. And I will also want to register the great appreciation on behalf of the UCCSA to the College of Humanities, to the school also, for keeping the memory of Steve Degrushi alive. His impact will last forever. I'm standing in on behalf of the UCCSA Synod Secretary, South Africa Synod, Reverend Bertram Swartz, and he has sent a message to me. I'll just read the message as it is. Steve Degrushi focuses on theology and development, and it impacts the core of ministry, life, and our witness. Prof. Steve Degrushi, as a post-colonial and or post-apartheid theologian, he addresses cutting-edge issues facing our contemporary society, such as health, poverty, environment, sustainable livelihoods, the South-North divides, fair trade, the racial equation, the reconstruction of our consciousness, and indeed, the challenging circumstances in post-colonial South Africa and democratic South Africa. Steve Degrushi's contribution to development studies is certainly critical, considering that he published extensively on the same. His approach turns out as the beacon that maps the way out, as we focus on sustainable development and the post-colonial reconstruction of Africa. Steve Degruchi's work in the areas of race relations and justice advocacy is deeply rooted in his theological reflections and his commitment to social justice. His approach offers valuable insights into how faith can intersect with struggles for racial equality and justice in societies that we live in. Steve Degrushi became very important for us in contemporary South Africa and the current politics and matters. This memorial lecture is helping us to grapple with issues of health, poverty, environment, sustainable levels, the South-North divides, fair trade, racial equation, the reconstruction of our social consciousness, and indeed, the circumstances in post-colonial Africa. No serious study can be done in the area of theology and development in Africa today without reference to the massive contribution of this eminent African theologian, Steve Degrushi. His books, as well as his numerous articles and publications and journals, are in high demand even today. Let us continue to wrestle in this sphere and in other spaces and build on the work of our very own Steve Degrushi. May his academic and professional contributions influence not only clergy, but all people here and all over the world. Prof. Steve Degruchi's insights encourage advocates to address injustice through contextual understanding, active solidarity, and a holistic approach fostering inclusive communities and nurturing hope for transformation. This is the message from Reverend Bertram Swartz, the UKZN South Africa Synod Secretary. And with this message, my dear brothers and sisters, I'd like to welcome you all as we reflect on the memorial lecture, that as we depart from this point, we reflect on our contribution and impact even in the generations to come. Sometimes we live only in the here and now, yet we ought to have an impact into the future. Those who will come after us, what will they learn from us? May we take this time and reflect and reshape our contribution and impact in the communities. A warm welcome to you all. Feel blessed.
Well, there is Dr. Kutsai Tarwana right at the back. He asked me, because he's selling some books up there. Of course, to be a good theologian, you need to read books. You can't be a theologian if you don't read. Yeah, so you want to be a good theologian and a good pastor, your way must pass through Kutsai, right at the back there, and get books. I see colleague Siebong is right at the back, if she can find a way and come down also, and others who are here. Now, I just wanted to these people live with a picture of the UKZN as not being able. No, the UKZN is one of the most powerful denominations in this country. J.L. Dube, who is the founding president of the oldest political movement in this country, comes from the UCCSA. The first doctor, the first medical doctor who was black in South Africa, John Nombula, the first ever black person to qualify as a doctor, was actually UCCSA. The list just goes on and on that you can have. So they might seem to be vocally challenged, but they are much better than that in other things. Our history has got so much to celebrate of the UCCSA. It is my other home. When I'm looking for another home, I go to the UCCSA. But yeah, over and above that, colleagues, I want to check, is the group here? Oh yeah, we are now going to have our entertainment group, which is, after it is gonna be followed by Dr. Tsetla. I will not stand up, he's just gonna come forward and to introduce our guest speaker. Dr. Tsetla, to those who may not know him, is the academic leader for theology at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. So he will come forward and do the introduction, and soon after that, our guest speaker will stand up to deliver his speech. I'll only come after that. So let's just have the group that's here to entertain us with some traditional music in Dlamu. I'm sure they've not gone to practice. They are coming. Okay, that's fine. We'll just wait for them.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm intimidated having to follow that. I think Tungwa set me up. If the DVC had managed to be here, he would have managed and been able to integrate this into his speech. But as it is, he submitted his speech before this performance, so I'll just read it as it is, and thereafter briefly introduce our speaker for tonight. Honored guests, esteemed colleagues, students, and members of our community, it is an honor to welcome you to the 2025 Professor Steve Degrushi Memorial Lecture, hosted by the School of Religion, Philosophy, Classics, in collaboration with the UKZN, the Center for Constructive Theology, and the KwaZulu-Natal Christian Council. This annual gathering is more than just an academic event. It is an opportunity to reflect on the life and legacy of a scholar who believed in the power of education, faith, and justice to shape a better world. This evening, we turn our attention to a subject that speaks to both history and the present: the Trump presidency and race issues in the United States and South Africa. Our distinguished keynote speaker, Dr. Derek Barson, will guide us through an exploration of these themes, helping us to critically engage with how societies wrestle with race, identity, and justice. South Africa's own history with race is both painful and instructive. We have known division, but we have also walked the long road towards unity. Universities, as spaces of learning and growth, have a duty to continue this journey, to be places where difficult conversations can happen, where history is not ignored but understood, and where knowledge is used to dismantle barriers rather than build them. Indlela ibuzwa kwabaphambili translates to the way forward is asked from those who have gone before. We draw wisdom from the past, not to remain there, but to move forward with purpose. Professor Steve Degrushi understood this deeply. His work was not confined to theory. It was action-oriented, rooted in community, and driven by a commitment to justice. His passion for theology and development was never about abstract ideals. It was about real people, real struggles, and real transformation. Professor Degrushi believed in the transformative power of knowledge, not just within lecture halls, but in the lived experiences of individuals and communities. His scholarship was never detached from reality. It sought to bridge faith and action, challenging societal norms while advocating for justice and equality. His legacy continues to inspire us to use our intellectual pursuits for the collective good. At a time when the world grapples with deep divisions, conversations such as these remind us of the role that universities must play, not only as centers of learning, but as spaces of ethical reflection and moral leadership. We are called to challenge injustice with both courage and compassion, to seek truth with humility, and to embrace diversity as a source of strength rather than division. I extend my deepest gratitude to our organizing partners for making this event possible. To all of you present, whether in person or joining via live stream, your participation affirms the importance of these discussions and strengthens our shared commitment to progress. May tonight's lecture inspire us not only to reflect, but to act, to continue the work of learning, questioning, and building a society that embodies the dignity and justice that Professor Degrushi so passionately pursued. Thank you and welcome. Those are the words from our head of college and vice principal of our university, Professor Nhlanhla Mkhize. And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor and privilege to present to you our keynote speaker, the distinguished Dr. Derek Barson, who, like Steve Degrushi, is both passionately a pastor and an academic. I will not read everything on his CV. We have already had quite a few speeches, but it is important for him that the two stand side by side. Pastor in the Reformed tradition as well, interestingly, and a professor. His Master of Arts in Religion was from Westminster Theological Seminary, and his Doctor of Philosophy in Historical Theological Studies, also from the Westminster Theological Seminary in 2019. His dissertation was titled A Divine Person in the Theology of Thomas Aquinas. He's currently working on a book entitled Beholding God, an Invitation to Skeptics, Seekers, and Believers. He's currently, since 2023, an adjunct professor of systematic theology and apologetics at Westminster Theological Seminary in Philadelphia. And it is therefore, ladies and gentlemen, my honor to ask you to stand and warmly welcome to the stage Dr. Derek Barson. Thank you.
Wow, there is no place like Africa. There really is no place like Africa. It is beautiful to be home, and I feel emotional being here among you. I am very grateful to be here. It is a real honor for me to be here tonight. I'm deeply grateful for this invitation. And it is my sincere thanks to Dr. Khumalo, Professor Khumalo, the faculty, the administration, and of course you, the students. It is truly a joy to be here among you, and just delightful to be back in KwaZulu-Natal for this lecture. Many of us tonight are wrestling with urgent questions, deep emotions, and the unshakable need to understand the turbulence unfolding in America, and to find our place in shaping what comes next. Now, while it's tempting to immediately dive into discussions about tariffs and US aid, immigration, the high-stakes exchange with President Zelensky in the Oval Office, starting here would be a disservice to ourselves. Instead, we must step back and ask the question, how did we get here? The US presidential election took place on November 5th, 2024, just a few months ago, and one word captured initial reactions to Donald Trump's victory. The word was this: unprecedented. His win was unprecedented for several ways. He became the first president since 1892. the only second in U.S. history to serve non-consecutive terms, following President Grover Cleveland. He was also the first president-elect with a felony conviction. But this is only part of the story. While many viewed Trump's victory as groundbreaking, my focus today is on a different word, one used by the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, one of America's most influential civil rights organizations. And when it became clear that Mr. Trump would win the Electoral College, the NAACP posted a single word on their Instagram account, the word unhistoric. And this raises a fundamental question for us here tonight. Why did so many, whether in celebration or shock, see his victory as unprecedented, while the NAACP, with a single word, declared it unhistoric? In other words, nothing new. And to understand this, we must turn to American history, my first focus today. I will then, as a second point, seek to give a brief summary of where we are today, which gives way, thirdly, to offering some brief reflections and thoughts on how we, as the people of God, should respond. Before moving forward, I must clarify why my lecture tonight focuses upon African American history. The reason is quite simple. Little to no reparative work has been done for slavery and the brutal injustices of the Jim Crow era. In addition, African Americans continue to be marginalized and oppressed by the ongoing presence of white supremacy with American governance, its policies and systems. And so let me turn now to our first point, a racialized history of America. In August 1619, the first enslaved Africans were forced onto American soil. Days earlier, a Portuguese ship bound for Mexico was intercepted off the Virginia coast by two English privateers, ships that were called the White Lion and the Treasurer. They seized 50 Angolan captives, originally taken by the Portuguese governor of Angola, with the White Lion ship landing at Port Comfort and selling 20 and odd enslaved persons to English settlers in Jamestown, the capital of the Virginia colony. This marked the beginning of institutionalized slavery in what would become the United States of America, though enslaved Africans had already been present in Florida, Puerto Rico, South Carolina, New Mexico, and Arizona for over a century. At the time, British slavery resembled indentured servitude, where poor Europeans received passage to America in exchange for typically 7 years of labor, after which they were granted land and seed. However, this system changed dramatically on July 9th, 1640, where 3 runaway indentured servants were captured. The General Court of Colonial Virginia sentenced the 2 white servants to additional years of service, but John Punch, a black African man, was condemned to lifelong slavery, the first recorded case of its kind. In 1662, Virginia passed the hereditary slavery law, decreeing that a child's status, free or enslaved, was determined by its mother, ensuring slavery's perpetuation. And this law disproportionately affected mixed-race children, and those children often born at the expense of a white man's sexual assaults against enslaved black women, condemning them to enslavement. Over the years, additional laws stripped black indentured servants of their remaining rights, culminating in the 1705 Virginia Slave Codes. These codes formally defined enslaved people as property, chattel, marking the shift from indentured servitude to lifelong bondage, where individuals lost all legal rights and became commodities. Included in these codes was the following decree: all servants imported and brought into the country who were not Christians in their native country shall be accounted and be slaves. All Negro, mulatto, and Indian slaves within this dominion shall be held to be real estate. If any slave resist his master, correcting such a slave, and shall happen to be killed, in such correction the master shall be free from all punishment, as if such an accident never happened, close quote. These laws enforced racial segregation and suppressed uprisings by fostering divisions among enslaved Africans. Over the next 50 years, booming tobacco and rice industries further increased the demand for enslaved labor, fueling the transatlantic slave trade and enriching colonial elites. By 1723, enslaved Africans had become so valuable that Virginia enacted laws to deny them freedom, condemning them to lifelong enslavement. And so by 1750, 300,000 of the 1.5 million people in the British American colonies were enslaved. As slavery expanded, so did resistance. Enslaved individuals ran away and rebelled, prompting harsher laws and the growth of free black communities. Meanwhile, in the 1760s, colonial agitation grew as the settlers resented British taxation, military occupation, and lack of representation. This unrest culminated in the American Revolution and the Declaration of Independence on July 4th, 1776, which rejected monarchy and aristocracy in favor of liberal and Republican ideals. During the Revolutionary War, black patriots fought on both sides, fighting, hoping for freedom, yet significant change remained elusive, and thus lay the groundwork for the American Civil War in 1861. Now, the founding fathers were hesitant in America to address slavery due to both their personal and national dependence on the institution. This is significant. This is evident in the 1787 U.S. Constitution, which, seeking to appease southern states, permitted the importation of slaves for yet another 20 years. It also included what is known as the 3/5 Compromise, allowing states to count 3/5 of their enslaved population for federal representation and mandating the return of enslaved persons, even in states where they had abolished slavery. Slavery was fundamentally an economic institution driven by greed, underpinned by capitalism's insatiable pursuit of profit. What Paul describes in 1 Timothy chapter 6 as the love of money. In the end, people were reduced to mere property. And while northern states gradually abolished slavery between 1777 and 1804, southern states enriched and expanded the practice. Although the transatlantic slave trade was banned in 1808, this did not end slavery in America. Instead, it spurred and forced breeding of enslaved children, and the growth of domestic slave markets grew. The 3/5 Compromise starkly illustrates how enslaved persons were viewed in early America. By counting 3 out of every 5 slaves for legislative representation and taxation, slaveholding states secured disproportionate power in the House of Representatives. In other words, enslaved persons were treated as chattel, dehumanized property exploited for political and economic gain, counted not for their humanity, but to bolster the Southern power. Despite early moves towards abolition in the North, slavery persisted in the South until the Civil War's end in 1865. The 1808 ban on transatlantic slavery merely reduced the supply of enslaved individuals, thus driving up their value and intensifying the internal slave trade within the country. Ultimately, the system evolved into a structure of lifelong bondage, sustained by laws and practices that dehumanized entire generations. The system is intertwined with the explosive growth of the cotton industry in the early 19th century, which reshaped America. By the 1830s, the U.S. had emerged as the world's leading cotton producer, with exports surpassing all others combined. In 1850, the states of Mississippi, Georgia, Louisiana, and Alabama, all southern states, led in cotton production, where enslaved individuals comprised roughly 46% of the entire population. In December 1816, political leaders in the United States House of Representatives established the British Colonialization Society, in other words, known as the ACS, the American Colonialization Society, the ACS, with the goal of resettling African Americans in Liberia, West Africa. The ACS argued that free African Americans could not integrate into American society and sought to address this supposed problem as reflected in the founding document of the New Jersey Presbyterian pastor, Robert Finley, influenced by the unbiblical and subjugating curse of Ham doctrine that is supposedly found in Genesis chapter 9. This idea gained support from the United States presidents Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and James Monroe, in whose honor Liberia's capital, Monrovia, is named. The ACS promoted Liberia as a free land for black people. And in 1822, Liberia was founded as a colony for freed blacks. It's declared independence from America in 1847, though the United States did not officially recognize Liberia's independence until 1862, which was during the time of the Civil War. Notable supporters of the ACS included Francis Scott Key, the author of the Star-Spangled Banner, the American national anthem, as well as the Supreme Court Justice Bushrod Washington, the ACS's first president. Influential members of Princeton Theological Seminary, such as Archibald Alexander, Samuel Miller, and Charles Hodge, also backed the effort. Although many seminary members opposed slavery in principle, they feared that immediate emancipation would trigger social unrest and upheaval, subscribing to the belief that blacks and whites could not coexist peaceably. As historian Henry Louis Gates Jr. notes, opposition to the ACS became a core principle of the black abolitionist movement because it and its allied societies opposed equal rights and citizenship for African Americans. Given this, it's unsurprising that Frederick Douglass vehemently criticized black colonialization. In 1849, in his first newspaper, the North Star, he writes the following: "For 228 years has the colored man toiled over the soil of America, under a burning sun and a driver's lash, plowing, planting, reaping, that white men might roll with ease, their hands unhardened by labor, and their brows unmoistened by the waters of genial toil. And now that the moral issue of mankind is beginning to revolt at the system of foul treachery and cruel wrong, and is demanding its overthrow, the mean and cowardly oppressor is meditating plans to expel the colored man entirely from the country," close quotes. The strong opposition of abolitionists and persons of color at the time is powerfully reflected in the words of Pastor Logan, head of the colored citizens of Syracuse. And he says the following: "We recognize in the scheme of African colonialization the most intense hatred of the colored race, clad in the garb of pretense philanthropy. The American Anti-Slavery Society was founded in 1833 with the purpose, as Gates notes, of uniting the American abolition movement's disparate elements around the idea of immediate emancipation. White, liberal Christians and Orthodox Protestants met with the Quaker City with in the Quaker City with black abolitionists. Together they signed the Society's Declaration of Sentiments in a dramatic ceremony that mimicked the signing of the Declaration of Independence. The public responded with outrage to the interracial meeting and called for the execution of the Society's leaders, fearing that its program of immediatism would destroy the Republic. Nevertheless, the American Anti-Slavery Society spawned auxiliaries across the North, held countless conventions, published newspapers and pamphlets, and set out hundreds of agents, black and white, to spread the anti-slavery message. As the most important anti-slavery organization, it remained active until the adoption of the 15th Amendment to the Constitution in 1870 appeared to assure full civil rights for blacks, close quote. This took place shortly after the American Civil War fought between the Union and the Confederacy, that is the South, which seceded in 1861 over the issue of slavery, especially the potential expansion of slavery westwards to new areas in the country. In 1858, Abraham Lincoln captured the nation's divide as following, as he states, "A house divided against itself cannot stand. I believe this government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free. I do not expect the Union to be dissolved. I do not expect it will cease to be divided. It will become all one thing or all the other." In 1857, the Supreme Court's landmark and highly controversial Dred Scott decision ruled that African Americans had no constitutional rights, a verdict that intensified national debate and edged the country towards civil war. When Abraham Lincoln became the 16th president in 1861, he led the nation through a 4-year conflict marked by the 1863 Emancipation Proclamation, which declared enslaved people in the Confederate territories to be free. Resistance persisted even as black soldiers began to serve in the Northern Union Army in May 1863, while the Confederacy only enlisted black soldiers in its final months. Many Northerners opposed black soldiers being in the war. And as Gates Jr. notes, I'm quoting here, officials and governors insisted that the Union Army wanted no niggers, and that this was a white man's war, close quote. Ohio Congressman Chilton A. White summed up the prevailing sentiment as follows, and I quote, "This is a government of white men, made by white men for white men," close quote. Moreover, black soldiers earned lower wages than their white counterparts until equal pay was finally established in 1864. After the war ended in 1865, the 13th Amendment abolished slavery nationwide, and the Reconstruction era began as the nation sought to rebuild itself and to reintegrate the former Confederate states of the South into the Union. Earlier that year, President Lincoln was assassinated by a Confederate sympathizer, and that action paved the way for Vice President Andrew Johnson's presidency. Johnson, however, and I quote, "rejected any notion of equal rights for blacks and unwaveringly opposed Republican attempts to institute a new social order in the South." Under his leadership, Southern states were allowed to pass draconian black codes that restricted the rights of freed men, punishing minor labor contract violations with arrests, beatings, and forced labor, while apprenticeship laws coerced many black miners, whether orphaned or deemed to be abandoned by a judge, to unpaid servitude for white planters. President Andrew Johnson's actions outraged many Northerners and stoked fears that the Southern elite would regain its political power. As a result, radical Republicans swept the 1866 midterms, and by 1868, Congress passed the 14th Amendment to grant citizenship rights to former slaves, as amendment ratified despite, or an amendment that was ratified despite the president's vetoes. If we step back 2 years, we find that less than a year after the Civil War ended, 6 ex-Confederate soldiers formed what's known as the Ku Klux Klan, otherwise known as the KKK. What began as a seemingly benign social club quickly transformed into a violent haven for white supremacist vigilantes intent on preserving slavery's legacy. Although the Klan officially disbanded in 1873, following the Civil Rights Act in 1871, their role in derailing the reconstruction of the United States after the Civil War is absolutely undeniable. During this period, we find that there were 3 key amendments that shaped the Constitution, or reshaped the Constitution. We have the 13th Amendment of Slavery, the 14th that granted citizenship and equal protection under the law, and the 15th, ratified in 1871, prohibited denying citizens right to vote on account of race, color, and previous condition of servitude, a provision currently contested by the United States President today. But even before Reconstruction officially ended in 1877, just 12 years after the Civil War was ended, Southern states had reinstated racial segregation under what is known as Home Rule, reversing many political and economic gains achieved by African Americans. With minimal federal intervention, Southern states' rights and self-governance led to widespread disenfranchisement and systemic oppression of black citizens. The 1896 Plessy versus Ferguson decision, as summarized by landmark cases in the U.S. Supreme Court, reinforced this stance by establishing the legal foundation for racial segregation, and they say as follows. In 1890, Louisiana passed the Separate Car Act, declaring that all rail companies carrying passengers in Louisiana must provide separate but equal accommodations for white and non-white passengers. The penalty for sitting in the wrong car was a fine of $25 or 20 days in jail. A group of black citizens joined forces with the East Louisiana Railroad Company to fight the act. In 1892, Homer Plessy, who was 1/8 black, purchased a first-class ticket and sat in the white designated railroad car. Plessy was arrested for violating the Separate Car Act and argued in court that the act violated the 13th and the 14th Amendments of the Constitution. After losing twice in lower courts, Plessy took his case all the way up to the United States Supreme Court, which upheld the previous decision that racial segregation is constituted under a separate but equal doctrine, close quote. The Plessy versus Ferguson decision upheld Jim Crow laws and the so-called black codes under the separate but equal doctrine, which was never truly equal. This framework was reinforced by widespread racial violence between the end of Reconstruction and 1950. Over 4,000 lynchings occurred, 72% of which targeted black individuals. These extrajudicial and often gruesome public executions were carried out by white supremacists, frequently for trivial or fabricated offenses such as speaking out of turn, failing to step off the sidewalk in deference to a white person, or being falsely accused of a crime. Post-Civil War progress for African Americans was systematically reversed by Jim Crow disenfranchisement laws. This regression is exemplified by Henry White, a mixed-race politician from North Carolina, who was the last black congressman in the 19th century, elected in 1896. but he did not seek re-election in 1900 due to overwhelming racist barriers. Tragically, no African Americans served in Congress until Oscar de Priest's election in 1929, and the South remained without a black representative until Andrew Young's election in 1973. In short, the Civil War did not yield the transformatory kind of outcome that Lincoln had hoped for. As W.E.B. Du Bois astutely notes in the opening paragraph of his classic, The Souls of Black Folk, he says, "The problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line." Jim Crow laws entrenched segregation in every facet of life. Interracial marriages were banned. Black barbers were prohibited from cutting white women's hair. And segregation extended to schools, accommodations, parks, theaters, libraries, buses, trains, and more. Even white and black persons who were merely playing cards or dice together, that was deemed to be an illegal act. Public facilities such as restrooms, elevators, and drinking fountains were segregated, reflecting the Plessy versus Ferguson separate but equal ruling, though in practice, separate always presupposed inferiority. Against this backdrop, resistance emerged once again. In response to the 1908 race riots in Springfield, Illinois, which were marked by anti-black brutality, the NAACP was founded in 1909 to champion civil rights. Simultaneously, the Great Migration began, during which roughly 6 million African Americans left the oppressive South between the time of 1910 and the 1970s, driven by a desire to escape racial violence, pursue economic and educational opportunities, and obtain freedom from the oppression of Jim Crow. Meanwhile, in 1915, America's first feature-length movie, The Birth of a Nation, originally titled The Klansman, dramatically depicted the Reconstruction era of after the Civil War by focusing on the rise of the KKK as saviors of the South, saving the South from allegedly black-induced chaos. The film presented a racist, revisionist history, portraying African Americans as dangerous, immoral, while casting the Klan as heroic defenders of white supremacy, or white society. It was also the first film screened at the White House, hosted by the President Woodrow Wilson, who sympathized with its message. The movie spurred a revival of the KKK, which used the movie as a recruitment tool, attracting millions of followers in the 1920s, such that in 1926, we see between 40 and 50,000 Klan members parading themselves down Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C., spreading anti-black, anti-Catholic, anti-Semitic, and anti-immigrant violent ideologies. Change begins in 1928 with Oscar de Priest's election, the first black congressman since 1900. Followed by milestones such as the Harlem Renaissance, the achievements of the Tuskegee Airmen during the World War II, and Jackie Robinson breaking the color barrier in 1947. In 1941, Philip Randolph's March on Washington movement pressured then-President Franklin D. Roosevelt to issue an executive order banning discrimination in war industries and paving the way for military desegregation in 1948. These efforts culminated in the Brown versus Board of Education in 1954, which declared that public school segregation to be unconstitutional. Though resistance persisted for many years, prompting James Meredith with NAACP backing to challenge the all-white University of Mississippi in 1962. Meredith's case faced fierce legal opposition, eventually reaching the United States Supreme Court after Mississippi repeatedly appealed lower court rulings affirming his right to enroll in the university. Yet it was Mississippi governor that defied the final ruling, using every available means to block Meredith's admission into the school. As tensions escalated, federal authorities intervened. With President John F. Kennedy's orders, United States Marshals and Mississippi Highway Patrol officers were needed to escort Meredith onto the campus. The next day, over 3,000 rioters gathered to block his registration, sparking deadly clashes. With the situation spiraling, Kennedy invoked the Insurrection Act and deployed federal troops. By the end of the riots, two people had died, hundreds were injured, marking a pivotal moment in the civil rights movement. In 1955, we see the murder of Emmett Till marks another great turning point within the movement. The 14-year-old boy was brutally lynched in Mississippi for allegedly whistling at a white woman. An all-white, all-male jury deliberated for just 67 minutes before returning with a not guilty verdict. And one juror admitted that they had delayed merely to drink pop, in other words, soda, otherwise it would have been shorter. Emmett's mother's decision to hold an open casket funeral exposed the brutality of racial violence in America, inciting national outrage and galvanizing the fight for civil rights. It was just a few months later, December 1955, Rosa Parks, an NAACP member and lifelong activist, refused to surrender her seat on a segregated Montgomery bus, leading to her arrest. Though sometimes dismissed as being tired, her act was deliberate, a coordinated protest against segregation. Her arrest sparked a 381-day Montgomery bus boycott led by Martin Luther King Jr., during which black residents boycotted buses by carpooling and by walking. The boycott culminated in the 1956 Gale versus Browder ruling that declared bus segregation to be unconstitutional, marking a major victory for civil rights movement and cementing Parks as an enduring symbol of resistance. It was February 1957, just 3 months later, that Martin Luther King Jr. founded what is known as the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the SCLC, with the goal of redeeming the soul of America through nonviolent resistance. The SCLC sought to coordinate the action of local Protestant groups through the South, drawing on the power and independence of black churches to support its activities. Now, the growing resistance against Jim Crow laws in the South, situated within the broader framework of systemic racism across the nation, surged during the 1960s. This resistance manifested on a variety of fronts, including the 1963 Birmingham campaign, which targeted public segregation. And it is here that in reply to a white clergyman's open letter titled A Call for Unity, that we find Dr. King pens his influential letter from Birmingham jail, articulating a theological and moral defense of nonviolent resistance against unjust civil laws. Later that year, 250,000 people gathered to march on Washington for jobs and freedom, where Dr. King delivered his iconic I Have a Dream speech. Meanwhile, we see Malcolm X, a minister and national spokesman for the Nation of Islam, initially rejected the notion of integration, advocating black nationalism and self-defense. His views, however, evolved significantly after leaving the Nation of Islam and embracing the Sunni Islam following his Mecca pilgrimage and the founding of his Muslim Mosque Incorporated and the organization of Afro-American Unity. Until his assassination on February 21, 1965, he increasingly stressed solidarity across all racial lines and sought alliances with other civil rights leaders in the fight against oppressive oppression across the globe. Founded in 1960, we see the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee called SNCC. They spearheaded sit-ins, freedom rides, and voter registration efforts, actions that John Lewis famously described as being good trouble. A major turning point was the 3 Selma to Montgomery marches in early 1965, during which the first march, known famously as Bloody Sunday due to the brutal violence inflicted on the marchers, shocked the nation and spurred President Lyndon Johnson to advocate for voting rights legislation, which led to the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And by 1966, under Stokely Carmichael, we find that SNCC shifts towards black power, black consciousness, and Pan-Africanism, rejecting dependence upon white allies, a perspective later echoed amongst figures such as Steve Biko in our land. Although legislative victories such as the Civil Rights Act in 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 outlawed segregation and protected voting rights, persistent racial inequality spurred urban uprisings and the rise of groups such as the Black Panther Party, which promoted black power, advocated class struggle, self-defense, and community programs, all in the interest of equality and dignity against the dehumanizing ways of economic and political violence. After Dr. King's assassination in 1968, the civil rights movement entered a new phase. By the 1970s, activism had diversified into economic justice initiatives like the Poor People's Campaign, a celebration of black cultural heritage and identity through movements such as the Black Arts Movement, and a push for political empowerment aimed at increasing black representation and advocacy for community interests. But the 1970s saw both resistance and progress to desegregation. If we jump from the late 1970s to President Trump's 2 terms in office, we see him running for president and popularizing the slogan, "Make America Great Again," claiming to have coined the term or the phrase in 2014. But in 1980, Republican presidential candidate Ronald Reagan ran on a platform with the same slogan, with George H.W. Bush as his running mate, who served as Reagan's vice president from 81 through 89, and then after him as president from 89 through 93. It was at the 1980 Republican Party convention that Reagan says the following: "For those who have abandoned hope, we'll restore hope, and we'll welcome them into a great crusade to make America great again." Reagan's presidency shifted the nation to the right, cut social program spending while boosting federal defense budgets, dismantling many of the Great Society programs by slashing funding for food stamps, Medicaid, the aid to families with dependent children, as well as targeting urban housing, education, employment training, and mental health services. These cuts, combined with corporate tax breaks, widened the wealth gap and adversely affected inner-city black communities. His use of racially charged language, as well as campaigning with a racial conservatism that pushed states' rights, is worth noting, appealing to white Southerners' desire to return the states' rights back to a pre-civil rights era. Additionally, in 2011, historian Tom Naftali pressed for a release of a 1971 tape of a conversation between the then President Richard Nixon and Governor of California Ronald Reagan, in which Reagan refers to African delegates as, I quote, and please pardon this, brothers and sisters, as monkeys, still uncomfortably wearing shoes. A remark that elicits laughter from Nixon. This racism comes into focus again in '82, where Reagan's war on drugs escalated mass incarceration. With '86, we find the Anti-Drug Abuse Act establishing a 100-to-1 ratio of sentencing disparity between crack and powder cocaine. A mere possession of crack now became a federal crime under Reagan, devastating black neighborhoods. The consequences of this systemic injustice have continued into the 1990s. In '91, we see the videotaped beating of Rodney King by the LAPD officers that sparked outrage and led to the 1992 LA riots following their acquittal. While in 1994, President Bill Clinton signed the crime bill, which expanded the prison system, increased police funding, and imposed stricter sentencing laws, including the 3 strikes rule that further fueled mass incarceration and disproportionately affected black Americans. The bill's Federal Death Penalty Act also enabled the death penalty for 60 new federal crimes, including some drug offenses that were not related to homicide. The Center for American Progress notes the following, that the crime bill also expanded the school-to-prison pipeline and increased racial disparities in juvenile justice involvement by creating draconian penalties for so-called super predators, low-income children of color, especially black children, who are convicted of multiple crimes. During the 2008 Great Recession, a housing bubble that was fueled by subprime mortgage-backed securities led to a widespread financial collapse. Black families targeted by discriminatory lending and predatory loans were hit the hardest, losing their homes and further widening the racial wealth gap. The same year, Barack Obama's inauguration as the first black U.S. president coincides with a surge in white nationalist movements. The Southern Poverty Law Center notes that there is a 755% rise in hate groups within the first 3 years of Obama's presidency, a backlash that helped to set the stage for Donald Trump's election and persists today, now framed as opposition to wokeness. Ironically, a term that originated within the black community a century before as a reminder to stay woke for the coming whitelash from the white community. This brings this first point to a conclusion. My second is this, the question of where are we today, a 30,000-foot high overview. If we return to our first and opening question, was the 2024 United States presidential election the result of was it unprecedented, or was it, in fact, unhistoric? We find that both are true. However, we need a qualification. While certain data points are unprecedented, beneath the surface lies a very familiar pattern in American history that cannot be ignored. As the NAACP pointed out, what's happening at base is unhistoric, nothing substantially new. The slogan, "Make America Great Again," is a call to revive the values of whiteness, a Reagan-era nod to states' rights and a pre-Civil War Southern ethos, realities playing out before our eyes each and every day. Just last week in Philadelphia, where I am helping to found a new church, the United States Education Department's Office for Civil Rights was shuttered. A department that addresses discrimination based on sex, race, and disabilities. And yet it's Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, that is known for abolitionists and civil rights activists who have fought for the marginalized and the overlooked for centuries. In his inaugural address just less than 2 months ago, President Trump heralded these words, and I quote, "The golden age of America begins now," close quote. For those, Mr. President, For whom are those days golden? Is it true of those who are hungry or thirsty? For the alien, the naked, the sick, or the imprisoned? Is it true for the least of those, as Jesus is so concerned about? Is it true for the orphan and the widow, as James exhorts, noting that a true and vital faith leads to fruit, yields fruit that is seen in good deeds? What about those who cannot speak up for themselves, the destitute, the poor, and the needy, as King Lemuel in Proverbs 31 pens so wisely? Or is this golden age only golden for those for whom it has long been golden, where capitalistic greed, violence, and oppression have segregated a society of haves and have-nots, of whites and BIPOC persons, particularly African Americans, with whom there has been no genuine desire for repair? But true reconciliation, as described in the scriptures, requires repair, and it necessitates truth-telling. Dear friends, there is blood in the soil, shed in the pursuit of the so-called almighty dollar, sanctified by the words on both sides of the dollar bill, "In God we trust." You see, our topic today is difficult not because it is opaque. It is difficult rather because truth-telling in America, within an increasingly totalitarian system of government, is not in vogue, though it has never truly been in vogue. This is why teaching Black history is a contentious topic today in the schools. Even threats of defunding K through 12 schools who teach honest Black history. But then, as Miriam Makeba so insightfully says, the conqueror writes history. They came, they conquered, and they write. You don't expect the people who came to invade us to tell the truth about us. Yes, truth-telling is important, but not merely to understand the past and to see the present more clearly, but to chart a path forward on which we can walk together. Without it, there is no movement towards justice, only time that never heals trauma, but only blinds the oppressor and his offspring, saying, "I was not like that." Yet the future of the oppressor and the oppressed are integrally linked, either dying together with hate or living together through love. In this second section, I initially thought of highlighting the parallels in racial and economic injustices between South Africa and America. However, if you are here and are from South Africa, you recognize the signs a mile away. There is no need to compare the details of both countries' histories when the garment is the same, though the pattern or the color is just slightly different. There is no need to describe the parallels between the Dutch East India Company in South Africa and the Dutch West India Company in America, or how in both countries British colonialists followed the Dutch with their muskets and their cannons to boot, or how legalized apartheid in South Africa was modeled upon the Jim Crow era of the South. Yes, there are countless other events that we can talk about and point to that I have not yet mentioned, how the House and Senate overrode President Reagan's veto of the Comprehensive Apartheid Act in 1986, his reluctance to sign the Martin Luther King Jr. Day into law, or how in 1989 Donald Trump took out full-page ads in major newspapers within New York, calling for the death penalty of the Central Park five Black and Latino teenagers falsely accused of rape, later exonerated, though Mr. Trump has never apologized. Nor have I mentioned Trump's 2018 remark referring to Haitian and African nations, and please excuse me, I do not use colorful language, but I quote, referring to African and nations and Haiti as shithole countries, or the fact that American national anthem, adopted in 1931 during the Jim Crow era, was written by a man who enslaved others, supported the American colonialization society, and penned the following closing words that never included black Americans. Oh, say, does the Star-Spangled Banner yet wave? Oh, the land of the free and the home of the brave. Yet what must still be acknowledged of America, even in just summary form because of time, is the white church's role in America's racist past, the transition from slavery to mass incarceration, and the economic injustices that persist today. It is in the yet-to-be United States of America that the church was meant to be a unifying organism, marked by love for God and love of neighbor, and thus affirming the equality and dignity of all persons in the light of a biblical anthropology informed of the Imago Dei. Instead, it has often sided with the mentality of empire rather than the least of these. This was seen on November 5th, 2024, when Donald J. Trump was effectively put into power by white nationalism, a white Christian nationalism that ingratiated itself with the powers of empire and pursued dominion. Instead of bearing the instruments of a towel and a basin, with the hope of the gospel, allegiance to Jesus Christ as Lord, and a vision for seeking the common good, it devised ways to save America through a dominionist strategy. America was founded on the belief that all men were created equal. Yet the white church has, since the inception of these ideals, found justifications for its segregated views and practices. The original charter of King James I to the Virginia Company in 1606 was to colonize the New World and to spread the Christian religion by propagating it, and I quote, "To such people as yet live in darkness and miserable ignorance of the true knowledge and worship of God, and may in time bring the infidels and savages living in those parts to human civility and to settle and quiet government," close quote. See, brothers and sisters, a formal Christian church was already there when the first enslaved persons were sold in Jamestown just a few years later. We find pro-slavery views in the early New England Puritan minister Cotton Mather in his work, The Negro Christianized. As we have already seen, the American Colonization Society was authored by Presbyterian minister Robert Finley and was supported by notable theologians such as Archibald Alexander, Samuel Miller, and Charles Hodge of Princeton Seminary, as well as many and many others. The institution of slavery was justified by the Southern Presbyterian minister Benjamin Morgan Palmer in his work, The South and the Slave Question. The list can go on as we consider men such as James Henley Thornwell, Robert Louis Dabney, and others. It was the church that perpetuated racial segregation both before and after the Civil War, which ended in 1865. The Southern Baptist Convention was formed when? In 1845, split from the Northern Baptists over the issue of slavery, which was regarded to them as an institution of heaven. Similarly, in 1844, the Methodist Episcopal Church South split from the North over this peculiar institution. And in 1857, the New School Southern Presbyterians followed suit. Thus, and this is my point, the white church split before the nation itself ruptured, providing a theological justification for the later secession of the Confederate States from the Union. Fast forward to 1975, when Francis Schaeffer, Lauren Cunningham of YWAM, and Bill Bright of Campus Crusade for Christ, now called CRU, felt called by God to exercise dominion over the 7 spheres of society in America. At the turn of the century, Christian nationalists gained prominence through a 7-mountain mandate authored by Lance Wallnau and Bill Johnson of Bethel Church. This mandate identifies the 7 spheres of religion, family, education, government, media, arts and entertainment, and business as key areas to forcefully establish God's kingdom on earth, aligning with C. Peter Wagner's New Apostolic Reformation, and supported by speakers such as the following: Speaker of the House today, Mike Johnson, U.S. Representatives Lauren Boebert and Marjorie Taylor Greene, Paula White of the White House Faith Office, and conservative activist Charlie Kirk. Christian Reconstructionism, another form of Christian nationalism, exerts influence through leaders such as Doug Wilson and the newly appointed United States Secretary of Defense, Peter Hegseth. Each movement seeks dominion from a top-down control, aiming to save a nation that otherwise was losing its moral anchor. For in the eyes of many evangelicals in America, the country was founded on Christian principles, being a city on a hill, a Christian nation, the basis for American exceptionalism. But brothers and sisters, America has never been a Christian nation. There is no American Christianity, as if everything is indexed to the land of the red, white, and blue. It was Frederick Douglass who, with conviction in his soul, said the following: "For between the Christianity of this land and the Christianity of Christ, I recognize the widest possible difference, so wide that to receive the one that is pure, good, and holy, and is of necessity, to reject the other as bad, corrupt, and wicked. To be a friend of the one is of necessity to be an enemy of the other. I love the pure, peaceable, and impartial Christianity of Christ. I therefore hate the corrupt, slave-holding, women-whipping, cradle-plundering, partial, and hypocritical Christianity of this land." Close quote. One question I have is this: why is the outrage animating Christian nationalism today so selective, concerned solely with pro-life issues and traditional marriages? Why is the compassion limited to the baby in the mother's womb, where immigrant children at the border, people of color of all ages, and economic justice issues remain absolutely neglected? There are, after all, deeply biblical concerns, yet white evangelicalism appears to be largely silent on these matters. Instead, it is often hidden behind the spirituality of the church doctrine, a doctrine first articulated by the Southern Presbyterian James Henley Thornwell, who argued that the church should avoid direct involvement in political or social issues and focus solely on spiritual matters, a foil for slavery, as he himself enslaved others and defended the practice. Our selective moral outrage and compassion do not reflect the way of Christ. Although one may argue that the white church in America has made progress over the last 4 centuries, true integration has yet to occur. Truth-telling is still frowned upon, and genuine repair is never on the table, even though we are to be ministers of reconciliation, as Paul exhorts us to be in 2 Corinthians chapter 5. You see, the idolatry of power within Christian nationalism is exemplified by a remark that Donald Trump made during his 2016 Iowa campaign rally, where he says the following: "I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody, and I wouldn't lose voters." Close quote. The results of November presidential election confirmed that very sentiment. Moving on, or should I say before moving on, I want to touch just briefly on the progression from enslavement through Jim Crow to mass incarceration in America and to the enduring economic injustices tied to racial oppression that are not easily remedied. Dr. Gates Jr. notes that before the Civil War, Southern prisons tended to be small and to hold almost exclusively white criminals, as the slave system maintained its own form of discipline. This observation leads little to the imagination. Today, America has the 5th highest incarceration rate in the world. It holds the largest prison population in the world of over 1.8 million individuals, which is actually down from 2.3 million individuals in 2008. In 2020, Black Americans were imprisoned at a rate of 5.5 times greater than white Americans, with blacks comprising the largest share of the prison population, despite representing only 14.4% of the nation's population. Although the rate of incarceration among Black Americans has declined since 2008, it remains more than 300% higher than in 1950. Moreover, all but 2 states deny voting rights to people with felony convictions while in prison, and many continue the denial of the vote after release, disproportionately and disenfranchising Black persons. In 2022, in 7 states, more than 10% of African American adults were denied the vote because of this law. In 2000, more than 1 in 8 Black men was ineligible to vote. In 2010, 4.35% of adult Black males in America were behind bars. Michelle Alexander, in the new Jim Crow, her book, Black Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness, says the following. The U.S. Census Bureau reporting in 2002 that there are nearly 3 million more Black adult women than men in Black communities across the United States, a gender gap of 26%, thus due to incarceration rates. In 2001, an estimated 1 in 3 Black males was projected to experience incarceration at least once in their life, 1 out of every 3. Whereas compared to white males, 1 out of every 17. Fortunately, these statistics are improving, with Black incarceration rates dropping 44% between 1999 and 2019. Yet the enduring impact on Black communities remains profound, contributing to high levels of fatherlessness, the breakdown of the family, and the far-reaching economic consequences during and after imprisonment. The Equal Justice Initiative, led by Brian Stevenson, shows how, and I quote, "The death penalty in America is a direct descendant of lynching. Racial terror lynchings gave way to executions in response to criticism that torturing and killing Black people for cheering audiences was undermining America's image and moral authority on the world stage. By 1915, court-ordered executions outpaced lynching for the first time. 2/3 of people executed in the 1930s were Black, and the trend continued. African American share of the South's population fell to just 22% by 1950, but 75% of those executed in the South were Black. When January 6th took place a few years ago, insurrectionists were labeled great patriots and pardoned. We witnessed a destructive pattern of inequality and injustice, reminiscent of the separate but equal doctrine. This is nothing other than systemic racism and whiteness. The economic ramifications for such systemic inequality are devastating, as evidenced by the fact that in 2022, for every $100 in wealth held by a white household, Black households held only $15. The question we must ask is this: where was the church? And where is the white church today? specifically white evangelicalism? Where is the transformative beauty of the gospel that calls us to love God with our whole being and our neighbor as ourselves, treating strangers with radical hospitality? And owing nothing but love. Jesus, he makes this clear. We cannot serve both God and mammon. Our hearts were created for one supreme love. You see, the excessive capitalistic pursuit of profit, it blinds us like all idols do. It forms us into its cold, impersonal image, one driven by power and privilege, rather than the common good of all and the glory of God. You see, when Paul says that the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil, it's not surprising that the excessive love of money has been the basis for racism in America, fueling oppression, injustice, and segregation, shaping the white church of America all the way back to 1619. And it's evident today in the white Christian nationalism that helped put Donald Trump in power. Instead of reflecting Christ in the gospel, this movement has been marked by greed, power, and privilege. Might I say and suggest that when the NAACP described November's election as being unhistoric, the white church's active involvement, as well as complicity too, in this election can be included. The issue is not simply that a Trump-like figure has risen to power, but the white church is inextricably bound to the history that has made this possible, blinded by an American exceptionalism that bears little resemblance to the gospel. As Jesus tells us, God and mammon are two very different gospels. And so I close with this. How do we then proceed? You see, in the church, those who have borne the weight of systemic oppression, both in South Africa and America, have found an anchor in the Exodus narrative, where we see the cry, "Let my people go." It resounds over and over again. And in these moments, the call of God's people has never been to align themselves with the empire, for such alliances corrupt the message of the gospel and they deform our own hearts. We have seen this before, where the Great Commission is in effect co-opted into an imperialistic mandate. My encouragement this afternoon does not come from one who has it all together, but from one who seeks to learn. From the church in this land, the land of my birth, here in South Africa, and from the black church in America, both of which have long drawn strength from the Exodus narrative. And so together we yearn with all creation for what still awaits us, that true and greater promised land of Sabbath rest, when all things will be made new, when injustice will be no more, when every wrong will be made right, and where the leaves of the tree of life are for the healing of the nations. Until that day, and in our present exilic status, we must heed the words of Jeremiah, to seek the well-being of the city, to pray to the Lord on its behalf, and to labor for the common good and the glory of God. We cannot lose our prophetic witness, dear brothers and sisters, of speaking truth to power. We must give ourselves to embodying counterformative ways of Christ, both in our lives as well as in our communities that we seek to nurture. We cannot seek to address systemic sin and suffering in our land while turning a blind eye to the sin and suffering in our own lives. And it's this dichotomy that is often found in the church, where, for instance, within white evangelicalism, informed by Puritan emphases, they focus greatly on individual sin, individual suffering, but leave no room for corporate systemic sin and suffering. But at the same time, liberation theology tends to focus on corporate and systemic sin and suffering, framed by the motif of empire, with society being distinguished between oppressor and oppressed. And my encouragement to us all is this: let us consider individual and corporate sin, personal and systemic injustice and suffering. Let us consider this through the lens of Jesus' words. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because He has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. I must close. I say this. The great commandment to love God with our all and our neighbor as ourselves not only reflects God's pattern of the world and how we are to live, but it is also the means of how we are to fulfill the Great Commission. And so to that end, let us love extravagantly, marked by the gospel welcome and hospitality, not to conquer, but to serve one another in community, as loved by God. Because this love reconciles the worst of sinners. It overcomes, it endures, and it is the way of life. It is the only force capable of transforming an enemy into a friend, as Dr. King reminds us. I conclude with these last words. Hope from Dr. King. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. May we be a people of God who resist in love, who work together to bend this arc in the power of God, trusting that God's faithfulness in his promises while speaking truth to power and not being afraid, not being silent. As Paul reminds us in this very hour, to live is Christ and to die is to gain Christ. Dear friends and brothers and sisters, never lose your prophetic voice. Never. Never make a deal with the empire. And never let our hearts be set on mammon rather than on Christ. Let the light of the church in South Africa shine bright again for the well-being of this land and as a witness and a guide for those like myself who look on from afar. The Lord bless you. The Lord keep you. It has been a great honor and joy to be with you today. Thank you.
Question and answer. Yeah, okay. Thank you, colleagues, and thank you to Dr. Passon. That was powerful and quite prophetic indeed, and challenging to us. As you kept on pushing, and I started hearing those Methodist preachers disrupting you up there. But it's wonderful indeed. We are going to go to our question and answer. Professor Dennis is going to lead us in that process. As he's doing that, I will ask that just when he finishes, the people, the cultural group will come and give us the last items. Then Mr. Thomas will come forward for a vote of thanks. So it's Professor Dennis now, and after him, there's going to be the cultural group, and after that, there will be an appreciation, a word of appreciation. How much time? You've got between 10 and 15 minutes.
Good. Thank you. I'm sure there will be lots of comments and questions. It's so good for us in South Africa to hear the voice of what happens on the other side of the ocean. There are similarities and differences. So I'll just give you a chance to ask questions and comments. Please don't start a new speech. The question must have maximum 2 or 3 sentences. Focus. One topic per question. And then we're going to take 3 at a time and give our speaker a chance to respond. And because we're quite late, we have 10, 15 minutes for this part of the session. So you're very welcome to ask questions, but please focus. Who would like to start? I don't know if there will be a roving mic for those who ask questions. Oh, it is a mic, yeah. Who would like to start?
Well, my question is, in terms of what has Malcolm X said once, that the most disrespected woman in America is the black woman. And it seems prevalent and it's shown with the elections that the black woman is the most disrespected person in America. And I wonder then, as the church, being one to have a prophetic voice, how does it do it when itself is patriarchal? Because we have seen that America is able to vote in a black male, but fails to vote in a black female. So how then does the church become a prophetic voice in that nature? Thank you.
Thank you. A second question, the first being about black women. Excellent question. Another comment or question? Over there, yeah.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. So from what I gather from the speech or lecture you've just given, from the very beginning, America has always been a white supremacist country. And again, that has come up in the election where white supremacists voted Donald Trump into power. And in the forefront of that was the white church. So what is the church in America trying to do to ensure that the church is being just in its operation and ensuring that race issues are even taken into the white church to ensure that everyone is seen as an equal? Thank you.
Thank you. So the question about the church, what it could do to bring the issue of racial inequality in the middle. As we take a third question.
Sure. Thank you, Prof. Mine is really around the parting words in terms of not bowing down to an empire. I mean, or rather not making a deal with an empire. Now, the challenge we've got in South Africa, which I assume would be very similar in America, is the deal we've made with an empire is of an empire that was dying. So when white South Africans went out of power, particularly white supremacy went out of power, we made a deal that we would forgive, we made a deal that we would accommodate. We even went to the extent of making a deal that would allow you a place of cultural preservation as long as you do not disrupt democracy. And it seems like that has come back to bite us. When understood from a Christian lens, it comes as forgiveness and is understood as forgiveness and is embraced as forgiveness. But it seems like we made a deal with an empire that was just recollecting strength to come back as white supremacy in partnership with Trump, as we are witnessing. Thanks. How do we manage that dynamic, especially with the Christian concept of forgiveness, but making sure that at the same time, we do not return, or rather we are not vengeful? Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe.
I woke up very early this morning and then to try and remember 3 questions. I'm going to go in reverse order. I think your last question about how do we do this? If I can be quite transparent, we are looking to you. I've spoken to a number of black leaders in America, and one of the questions is this: is the church in South Africa, in fact, a helpful beacon of hope to look to, because we do not have the answers? Hence, my encouragement is to not be silent. We don't have all the answers, and I think the other thing that is important to understand, there is a difference. Now, remember, we're talking about general principles, general brushstrokes. There is a significant difference between the black church in America and the white church in America. So even in terms of the issue, in terms of black women, the first speaker's question, 92% of black African-American women in America voted for Kamala Harris. You often hear the story, and rightly so, that they are tired, very tired. I would say, with trying to keep things short, to answer the last speaker, I personally do not have all the answers. I am trying to meet with South African ecclesiastical leaders. I am trying to read Dr. Busek and Tutu and Beenodir, etc., trying to learn. But the church of this generation can also learn from the previous generation. And I think, to be quite honest, you will have better insights that I am going to be the student of you, the teacher. That is in part why I'm here. As it pertains to patriarchy, I think the issue of patriarchy within the black church is far more diminished than in the white church. I personally, I have to be careful, am not sure how we renew white evangelicalism in America. In the natural, I say there's no hope. Because as soon as you talk, I am white, I am woke, CRT, critical race theory, etc. Here's the problem with white evangelicalism in general. There is a toxic mix of arrogance and ignorance. When you put arrogance and ignorance together, you know everything, but you at the same time know nothing. Which means you cannot learn. Which means you cannot hear the truth that is spoken. Which means that you cannot reconcile. And my only hope is this, is in Romans chapter 4 and verse 17. Is God is a God who raises the dead, and he speaks of things that are not as though they are. Because in you and me, we can, I don't know. But I have to trust that the resurrection is enough. And then to the brother, can you, the second question?
The second question about how the church can change.
Well, I think I might have just alluded to that. Yes, I did. My prayer, put it this way. Part of my trip in being in South Africa now is to learn, to go back and to help the church. But it will take a long time, and we will need divine help. And I trust that South Africa Church will be able to help with great wisdom and insight the church in America that needs you.
Thank you, Derek. I think it is at least two things to bring home. The first is that as much we look to our brothers in the US, it's the other way around. You look to us as well. And the second, I think the beautiful phrase of mix of ignorance and arrogance. I will remember that. Okay. Something. And so many other things. Let's go a second round. I'm not sure whether we have the time to do much more than another round. Let's take three more. Who would like to ask a question? Thank you. Again, don't forget to focus, not a long speech.
Thank you very much, Prof. Sir, I heard you in your delivery speaking about the truth that is to be told. But I think for us as Africans, we've told or listened to the truth for too long. And I think it is time for us not to speak the truth, but to act the truth. We cannot continue to walk together. I listened as you counted the years. We cannot continue to walk together as though we are people that don't matter. America continues to take, and then we become, or not even become, we are victims that become beggars to the perpetrator. And so I want us to try and find some common ground, but not diminishing the value of an African child. And I believe this in the depth of my heart, that God is not the God of the ones who are privileged, but of the ones who are marginalized and who are downtrodden. And so, as we continue to speak of the white church, I'm not sure if we are really speaking about the church. We are speaking about something, but definitely it cannot be the church. If it is very comfortable with being a force of oppression and a force that does not resonate with those who are oppressed. And that is where I want to end.
Thank you. Yeah, maybe. It's easier to remember.
Dear brother, I would like to respond to that. Firstly, brother, I agree wholeheartedly with everything you have said. I personally would change nothing. It is the sentiment of my soul. James is very interesting. In the Epistle of James, he talks about what is a pure and undefiled religion. I think many within the church can, if you're reformed, talk about justification, union with Christ, etc., right? We go down our creedal statements. We bring in our theological confessions. But James says this, is that a pure and undefiled religion consists of two things: caring for the orphan and the widow in their distress, and to keep yourself unstained from sin of the world. That to me is a profound, profound statement, because our discipleship in the West has tended to make believers. I believe justification. I believe this creedal statement. It has not formed disciples. And so what we are seeing is we are not seeing people embodying and reflecting the nature of Jesus, where God does identify with the marginalized and the oppressed wholeheartedly. So in my lecture, I said your very point, not in my words, but of Frederick Douglass, the great African-American abolitionist, who says there are two Christianities in America. There is the church, the Christianity of the slaveholder, and there is the Christianity of Christ.
Thank you. We'll take two more questions separately. I give a chance. Yeah, we need to stop now? Quicker. One more. Okay.
Sorry, I just want to make a quick announcement. Black Mercedes NP86357 is blocking a driveway. Somebody needs to leave. If you can please remove your car. Thank you.
Okay, right. Okay, we come to the end of this evening. I take one more question, but again, try to be very short in the way you formulate your question. Somebody up there?
Yes. Well, I think regarding the church in America and regarding the church in South Africa also, it's pretty much similar. From what I've been listening to you, it's pretty much the same. So I wonder if we'll be able to help you, though. Like my brother said here, there has been the welcoming aspect. However, you're welcoming, however, somebody does not want that welcome. So how do we really, because South Africa has been for the past, I don't know how many years, and I don't think it's South Africa only, but all other countries, because it's very similar. It's not different, because there is the church of the people that went, the AfriForum that went there, they are also evangelists. Yes. Very Christian, very rooted in Christianity. So it's very tricky. It's the same, similar.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure on the exact question. Maybe it's similar to the last one. I'll say two comments. If we go back to James, in James chapter 2, there are two kinds of people, religious people. Both say they have faith. Both say they believe. Both say they follow Jesus. One has fruit, the other has no fruit. James says this: you can say you have faith all you like, but if your life is not embodied and looks like Jesus, your faith is dead. The other thing is this. Right now, systemic racism is causing the borders to be closed and to deport immigrants, all in the guise of white supremacy. Here's the thing that is ironic that the white evangelicalism needs to consider. White people in America are leaving the church by the millions. In the last 25 years, 40 million churchgoers have left the church in America. I'll say that again. In the last 25 years, 40 million churchgoers no longer go to church anymore. The way in which America is going to be reached with the gospel is this, I believe, is through immigration, where people come from Africa and they come from South America and they bring their gospel and they come into a nation that is rejecting the gospel. Just as we are seeing in London, there's a rejection of the gospel, and actually today, the church in London is growing, but it is not growing because of the white church. It is growing because of immigration, and people who love Jesus are moving in. And so as much as Trump is getting rid of immigration, justice will have its day. And part of our hope is that people who love Christ, who do not look like the color of my skin, will come into America and teach America what the gospel truly is. It has been wonderful to be with you.
Thank you, Derek. We take the last one. I don't know what about you, but I think when I go home, I'm going to read the epistle of James again. The last question or comment, and I think we had many men talking. It would be nice to have a woman to
My question is, there is a global trend whereby the state has co-opted the church to manipulate the citizens and rule smoothly. It's what happened in America. And subsequently, the church has become an arm of the state just to gain custody and funds. Then how can we achieve a paradigm shift and save the church? Thank you.
So I need to be... I think South Africa, once again, who gave theological justification for apartheid? It was the NG Kerk, right? We found a way, not a lot of people like myself. We found a way, the church, the authentic church in this country, found a way to liberate this nation. Once again, I think that the way in which, when we look at America and the complicity of part of the church with the nation in embedding of things, does it not remind you of what has come before here? And if what has come before here was overturned, there is hope, not because of my strength or your strength, but because of the gospel, but we can also learn from how you have led. And that's why, once again, I say, please do not be silent. Lead. And I hope, in the mercy of God, nothing more than that, because in America, we do not deserve it. But in the mercy of God and the power of God, may He do something that in the natural looks impossible.
Thank you. I think now we have the last performance and then the vote of thanks. Calvin with the
Yeah, must cut on my band. Yeah, mum show finger. Yeah, must cut on my band. Yeah, mum show finger. Yeah, Miss Tomato Man. Yeah, no Coca-Cola. Yeah, Miss Pika Pika. Yeah, no Coca-Cola. Mina ngiphethe londi yena ngiphethe na yena mina ngiphethe londi yena ngiphethe na yena mina ngiphethe kahle yena ngiphethe na yena mama mina ngiphethe matuba yena ngiphethe na yena Ni petu nangoma yena nketela na yena yena nketela yena mastaka mabandi yena mshwetinga yena mastaka mabandi yena nketela Petu londi yena nketela yena mama Yeah, must cut on my band. Yeah, mum show finger. Yeah, must cut on my band.
Jerusalema ikhaya lami ilondoloze uhambe nami zungangishilana Jerusalema ikhaya lami ilondoloze uhambe nami zungangishilana dawo yami ayikholana buso wami awukholana ilondoloze zuhambe nami dawo yami ayikholana buso wami awukholana ilondoloze Shilana, ilondoloze, 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 zungangishilana, dawo yami ayikholana, buso wami awukholana, ilondoloze. Dawo yami ayikholana buso wami awukholana ilondoloze zuhambe nami Jerusalema ikhaya lami ilondoloze uhambe nami zungangishilana Jerusalema ikhaya lami ilondoloze uhambe nami zungangishilana dawo yami ayikholana buso wami awukholana ilondoloze zuhambe nami
Wow, that was exciting. Before I proceed with the vote of thanks, I'd like to acknowledge the UCC SA members that arrived a little bit late. If you could please stand up, wherever you are. Just want to acknowledge you. Welcome. Thank you. As we also have a member from KZN that's here as well. Welcome. Thank you. Good evening, honored guests present here today, both physically and virtually. It gives me great pleasure to offer the vote of thanks for this esteemed event, honoring the late Professor Steve Degrushi. In no particular order of importance, I wish to extend our thanks and gratitude to the following: the Degrushi family, UKZN Executive Management, the DVC and Head of College of Humanities, Prof. Mkhize, the Dean and Head of School of Religion, of Philosophy and Classics, Prof. Khumalo, the School of Religion, Philosophy and Classics Management Committee, the Morris Webb Trust, UCCSA, CCT, KZNCC, SJTI, SMMS, Cluster Partners Leadership, Cluster Students, UKZN Students, UKZN College Corporate Relations Department, in particular Rakshika, Tintin, and the team. The admin team working in the background, Andile, Naresh, Percy, and Rogers. Last but not least, our guest speaker, Dr. Basan. We have taken note of the work that is still to be done in relation to race, identity, and justice. Aluta continua. I thank you.
Thanks indeed. And now, because Calvin has intentionally recognized the UCCSA delegation here. He has compelled me, because I saw that there's a Methodist delegation that is here, that I also want to recognize them, let them stand up and you see them. They are from the community. You can stand up, you can stand up. Thank you, thank you, thank you. This is the choir that sang for us last year, and we really appreciate your presence. Had I known, we would have actually had you to come and sing again also this year. We really appreciate your presence. Colleagues, it is the tradition of this lecture and others that we do at the university that the last item that we sing is the national anthem. And so we're going to do that. After that, we'll just feel free. There are meals, it's packed dinner for you outside there. You'll just have your own packed dinner and then be free to go. But we really appreciate your participation and your attendance. We see you, I see all the leadership here, Reverend Lanzi, and many, many other leaders of the church who are with us today, and all of you. Dr. Paswan, we really appreciate you and the work that you've done for us. Let me give him a round of applause again. Thank you. Oh wow, there is a present. There is a present for him. I think it's being brought. We just forgot it. It's somewhere here. Whoever is sitting next to it, we need to honor our brother for having come all the way to bless us. Okay. Thank you. You may come forward so that the cameras may see you as you receive it. Okay. Well, I think we need to. We've upgraded now to the lecture. We actually present this to every presenter. Thank you so much. Yes. And then, oh, you still want more of this? Thank you. And we also present you with books that have been published in the school. So it's material that comes from us. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thanks. This is beautiful. Nkosi sikelele Africa. Thank you so much.